Have you been the victim of any kind of scam? I'll tell you what I think is a scam, actually, is the system of freehold and leasehold, which operates in England, certainly. The idea that if you buy a property, you don't actually own it, you just buy the use of it for 99 years or whatever it happens to be. That doesn't really seem to be a very sensible system. And it is leading, of course, to a very great deal of problems as it relates to cladding, because 5 years on nearly from Grenfell, hundreds of thousands of leaseholders living in high-rise homes which are unsellable and potentially dangerous will continue to face fire safety bills of up to £100,000 each, because, again, yesterday, MPs voted against banning building owners from passing on remediation costs. So there you are, you're in your property, Grenfell happens, the awful truth of the dangerous nature of that cladding is revealed. You find out that your building has been clad in such a fashion or in a similar fashion, and it turns out that enabled by a government or enabled by MPs that vote in a particular way, you are the one that has to face the bill, not the owner of the building, and not, for that matter, the government, who I would suggest have pockets which are sufficiently deep to make this go away. The total bill reckoned to be between 12 and 15 billion pounds. The government's had 5 years to get this right. This predates COVID. They can't make the case that the money's not there because of COVID, because this goes all the way back to when Grenfell happened in 2017. 0345 6060 973 is my number. You can text, you can tweet, you can email. Tell me how the cladding scandal has impacted you, and if you do continue to live in one of these dangerous, unsellable, potentially dangerous buildings, I'd very much like to hear from you. Now, the backbench rebellion was growing to an extent. 31 Conservative MPs did rebel here, including Ian Duncan Smith, curiously, but 340 to 225. That's how MPs voted against an amendment to the fire safety bill that would have protected leaseholders from costs to make their homes safe in the wake of the Grenfell Tower disaster. The total bill then for leaseholders could be between 12 and 15 billion pounds. Now, the housing minister, Christopher Pincher, is saying that the bill's introduction, the fire safety bill, could be delayed for another year as it now goes back to the Lords. And he does rather, it seems to me, have a sort of metaphorical gun at the heads of interested parties here, saying you either accept the fact that leaseholders have to pay up to 100 grand, which is in my view desperately unfair, or the fire safety bill in any form will not pass, or at least it will be delayed for potentially another year. It's not a particularly fair choice as far as I can see. 0345 6060 973. How has unsafe cladding impacted you a number of years on from Grenfell if you live in a building which is unsafe or is thought to be unsafe because of the way it is clad? We know the number of people affected by this is absolutely enormous. 0345 6060 973. Russell Conway is a senior partner at Oliver Fisher Solicitors, specialising in property law, and he joins me on the line now. Russell, thank you very much for your time this morning. What do you make of what happened in the Commons yesterday?
Well, it's been a grim day for leaseholders today, and there's a grim irony. On one side of London, we have the Grenfell inquiry looking into fire safety in buildings, and over on the other side of London, we have the House of Commons making leaseholders pay for something which simply isn't their fault. Because nearly everyone who knows about flats and fire safety is aware of the fact that the problems we're now looking at have been caused by poor government building regulations drafted by government civil servants who haven't got it right. And it was as a direct result of those poorly drafted building regulations that the Grenfell fire happened. But now the government is saying that that the buildings have to be put right, but the leaseholders are going to have to pay for it. Now, they've tried to sweeten the pill a little by saying they're going to give loans to the leaseholders, but some of those loans will take 100 years to repay. Yeah. And leaseholders don't really want to spend 100 years paying off a substantial sum of money for something which isn't their fault.
The implication of this decision is that MPs, or at least those 340 MPs who voted in this way against that amendment to the fire safety bill, the implication is that those MPs believe that the fairest solution to that which Grenfell so tragically unveiled is to continue imposing bills of up to 100 grand in some cases on these leaseholders rather than on builders or heaven forfend the government themselves whose regulations permitted this.
Well, that simply can't be right, because the leaseholders bought these flats in good faith. They had no knowledge of cladding in most cases. Nobody knew what cladding was. Nobody knew how unsafe it was. Nobody knew what was beneath the cladding. And nobody had any realization of the fact that they could be living in a block of flats covered in plastic or petroleum. So I don't know quite why the government are taking this view. Certainly, leaseholders can't afford the massive costs. Some people put it at £15 billion to remove this cladding. Others put it at much higher, perhaps 20 billion. So far, the government pot, which has been set aside for this, is no more than 3 or 4 billion. And people are going to be made bankrupt. People are going to fairly shortly be receiving service charge bills for £25,000, £50,000. If you receive a bill for £50,000, it's very difficult to pay that out of income. But worse still, you can't even remortgage, because the mortgage companies won't allow people to remortgage because of the cladding issues on the building. So you don't have the money yourself, you can't remortgage, and so you're stuck. What are you going to do?
We've known, haven't we, since within a couple of days of Grenfell, arguably within a couple of hours. In fact, some residents were making the case before it happened. We've known that cladding was fundamentally to blame, at least for the speed with which Grenfell Tower was consumed by fire. So this is not new information. It predates COVID by some years.
Oh, yes, but a lot of the people, the vast majority of the people that are impacted by this, bought their premises long before Grenfell.
Quite. The point I'm making is that the government, and indeed the previous government under Theresa May, have had years to deal with this. They've had the resources to deal with this. They could have dealt with this by saying, OK, we know it's going to cost between 12 and 15 billion pounds, according to estimates. Here's the money, because we're the government and we're able to do that.
It's even worse than that, because long before Grenfell, there was a similar file at Lacanal House in South London, and there was an inquest, and the coroner at that inquest wrote to the government and said, you've got to change the building regulations. Nobody can understand them. They're garbage. You've got to change them. And the then minister dealing with the matter simply consigned it to the filing cabinet under the desk, and nothing was done. And a lot of people are saying that one of the main reasons for Grenfell was the absence of coherent and readable building regulations.
Are you hopeful, given that there was a backbench rebellion of 31 Conservative MPs, are you hopeful there might yet be a political solution to this if that rebellion grows and more Conservative MPs rebel and consider that the government is, in fact, the agency which is going to help to solve this? Are you confident that might happen?
It could happen. Remember, there are millions of leaseholders in England. Not only are there millions of leaseholders, but there are millions of relatives of leaseholders. And some of the people who have these flats will be looking to the bank of mum and dad or the bank of uncle and auntie. And all these people are impacted by the government's failure to compensate them for this problem, which is a problem of the government's making. These leaseholders are completely innocent, and it's so wrong that they are now being put into, frankly, health problems, bankruptcy problems, losing their home problems, homelessness problems. This is a dreadful thing that the government are doing, and it will rebound upon them unless they revisit it and do the right thing.
And in more general terms, Russell, you are a specialist in property law. Do you think this episode has shone a light on the whole system of freehold and leasehold? It is far from universally used around the world. It's an odd system on the face of it. It's not one, if we were starting from scratch, that we'd probably go with, is it?
No, I mean, we're one of the few jurisdictions in the world that uses this odd system where you don't own your flat.
Yes.
You simply have the benefit of it for a few years, and freeholders make quite a lot of money out of you in that they levy service charges. If you want to do some changes in the flat, they make you pay money for it. If you want to sublet, they make you pay money for it. Leaseholds are generally a cash cow for freeholders, and we're rare within the world having this system. And if there's any benefit to all of this, is the fact, as you rightly highlight, the fact that a light is being shone on leasehold, and we do need to get rid of leasehold and have a new system, which has been suggested by the Law Commission, which is common hold, which will be a better system, and perhaps all of this may hurry forward its implementation.
And just briefly, for anyone unfamiliar with that proposal, how would common hold work?
Well, common hold would mean that individual leaseholders would, in fact, own their building. Everybody would own their flat. It wouldn't be a system where you have a faceless freeholder raking off the profits from the leaseholders. The leaseholders would all own their properties, and it's such a better system.
Russell, thank you very much. Russell Conway, Senior Partner at Oliver Fisher Solicitors, who specialises in property law, joining me this morning. 0345 6060 973. This show was on air when the Grenfell disaster happened, and very quickly, within days, I think, of that disaster, we were asking, as people tend to do in the wake of such incidents, what are the lessons to be learned? And it was pretty clear that lesson number one, very, very quickly, was get this cladding off these buildings. And here we are nearly 4 years later, still arguing about the cost. As I said in the conversation with Russell, this was a whole Prime Minister ago. There has been plenty time for the government to do the right thing here, and I think part of the right thing would be to ban building owners from passing on costs to leaseholders. Because you've got people who, through absolutely no fault of their own, find themselves in buildings which are still potentially dangerous, and the only remedy that they currently have for that is to either borrow or spend a huge sum of money making their homes safe. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, tweet at LBC, email Darren at lbc.co.uk. Thousands of leaseholders having to take out loans to cover the removal of cladding, and we've got this discrimination that's in place as well, depending on how many floors up you are. Below the 18th metre, below the 6th floor, roughly, the cost falls on the leaseholder to remove the cladding. And I say again, this is absolute. I mean, okay, you can have a conversation about the magic money tree. The Prime Minister in power at the time was on record as saying there's no such thing as the magic money tree, while allowing it to sprout in Belfast and showering its fruits onto the Democratic Unionist Party at the time. But 12 to 15 billion quid in 2017 to essentially fix this, or whenever the scale of the problem became evident, would not have broken the bank. We've spent or budgeted somewhere between 30 and 40 billion pounds on a test and trace system that doesn't work. So the money absolutely could have been found, and it amazes me and disgusts me that it wasn't. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, tweet at LBC, email Darren at lbc.co.uk. And even if you think it's not the job of the government to bail out private individuals who, for whatever reason, have ended up in this situation, the fact that government building regulations permitted the use of this material notwithstanding, you would surely say, okay, if it's not the government's responsibility, who does that leave? It leaves the owner of the building or the people who've got to live in the building. You would surely say the owner of the building would be the entity that has to carry this particular burden. MPs yesterday voting again against banning building owners from passing on the costs. So deliberate act of policy in this fire safety bill that puts the burden again on those living in unsafe buildings through no fault of their own.
This is LBC.